Greetings, students of Historical Theology at the King's University. This is Ryan, again, your professor for this course. And today we're going to be talking about the rest of the councils in the patristic era. We talked a little bit about Nicaea already. And probably an important point to make is even though Nicaea is in 325, things aren't really settled. They're still kind of debating things until around 362. More or less, everybody's kind of reached their Christological conclusions about 362 as far as Nicaea is concerned. We will have a Christological controversy later on, but initial Christology is sort of settled, and they turn their attention to the Spirit. So in the first council of Constantinople in 381, we still have to deal with Arianism to a significant degree. And they want to deal with Arius just kind of hasn't gone away. There's still some people today that are fond of him. And yeah, it's problematic. But that's not the main issue. One of the main issues is to also focus on the Holy Spirit. As I said in our last lecture, Nicaea was focused mostly on Jesus, and so Constantinople wants to focus on adding some comments about the Holy Spirit. The two main heresies that they're trying to deal with beyond Arianism are Apollinarism, and this is Apollinaris of Laodicea. And his perspective is that if you think about a human person, most people either divide body and spirit, or they divide body, soul, and spirit. Apollinaris, he divides body, soul, and spirit. He doesn't believe that Jesus could have had a human mind. Rather, Jesus has a human body, and he has a lower sort of soul. And so for Apollinaris, it's not body, soul, spirit, it's body, soul, and mind. And Jesus' mind was divine, according to him. The problem with this is whatever Christ did not assume, Christ did not heal. This is Gregory of Nazianzus, and he's one of the main people arguing against Apollinaris in Council of Constantinople. The phrase that has become most famous from him is, "What Christ has not assumed, Christ did not heal." And this is really important. It may not seem that way. It may not seem like a big deal that Jesus had a divine mind, but we can't believe that. Jesus has to have had a human mind, because if he has a divine mind and not human mind, he's not fully human. And the last time we said we don't want to say 100% God, 100% man. We want to say fully human, full man. This is one of those. This is that. We want to say Jesus is fully human. If he's fully human, then that means that he had a human mind. If he is not fully human, then he cannot save. And that's really what we're getting at when we talk about the fundamental nature of heresy. I think we've talked about this previously already. The nature of heresy is not just a bad idea. It's not just this is something we disagree with, or this isn't what the Bible teaches. Plenty of things that the Bible doesn't teach aren't heresy. They're just bad theology. So something has to be more than just wrong in order to be heresy. And really the dividing line is, does it affect the nature of salvation? And see, Apollinarism actually does affect the nature of salvation. If Jesus is not fully man, he can't save. Nicaea says Jesus has to be fully God in order to save. That's Athanasius' argument against Arianism. But then in Constantinople, Cappadocian Fathers, this is greater than Nazianzus, greater than this Basil of Caesarea. Their argument is not only does Jesus have to be fully God to be to save us, but he has to be fully man in order to save us. This is not Apollinaris' perspective. It's heavily problematic. If he is not fully man, then we are still in our sins. Humanity has not been united to the Trinity, and we do not have life of the Trinity. We are not saved. This is vital. Another heresy that they deal with, and we talked about this a little bit already, is Sabellianism. Sabellianism is just another word for modalism. Sabellius essentially taught what we talked about with modalism, that we have one God, but that one God is just is expressed in three different ways. So the one God is at sometimes the Father, and at sometimes the Son, and at sometimes the Spirit, but they never exist all at the same time. This is such a problem. When Jesus prays to the Father, who's he praying to? If they don't coexist, if they're not co-eternal, who's he praying to? When he gets baptized and the Father says, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased," and the Spirit descends upon him in the form of a dove, how does that work in modalism? That just doesn't make any sense. Okay. And so that's the heart of Constantinople. It adjusts the Nicene Creed to add a paragraph about the Holy Spirit, and this is where it's in that paragraph on the Holy Spirit where the Filioque clause gets added. We talked about in our last video. And then they're trying to really put Arianism to bed. They're trying to get rid of that. And then Apollinarism and Sabellianism. Those are the main things that happen here at the Council of Constantinople. Between the Council of Constantinople and the Council of Ephesus, we have this thing called the Arbitration of Carthage, which is not properly a council. It happens in 411. And this happens to settle the Donatist controversy, the Donatist schism, which is from the Diocletian Persecution. And if you remember, Constantine put an end to the Diocletian Persecution in 313. And there's a problem here that in the Diocletian Persecution, we have a North African bishop named Felix, who apparently, at least according to the story, had handed over his scriptures. And these people were called traitores, which means they handed something over, but it's also very close to the pronunciation for traitor. So he's accused of being a traitores. And this raises the question of whether or not his priestly duties were to be recognized. Should he be rebaptized? If so, what of those that were baptized by him? So this raises a huge question about sacraments and the holiness of the priest and that sort of thing. It's not until around this time, with writings of Augustine primarily, that we start to settle this. And Augustine essentially argues that it's not the holiness of the priest that matters, that it's the sacraments themselves that convey grace, that it's the sacraments themselves that are gifts from God, that are holy from God. And you can see later on how this is going to create an issue for us, because if you're saying official church teaching is that the holiness of the priest is irrelevant, then potentially have a hard time later on if you have priests that aren't concerned with being holy. That's a problem. Right? But one of the things that Dr. Fairbairn used to tell us in our classes was, you never know where someone's going to take your ideas. And it's true. You never know where someone's going to take what you say or what you do. Augustine would not have accepted, wanton, sinful behavior in the priesthood. But what he says here sort of sets that up. Okay. So anyway, the arbitration in Carthage is in 411. There's almost 300 Catholic bishops, almost 300 Donatist bishops, and they come together to try to settle the Donatist schism. And the conclusion is the Donatist clergy are banished from the church. The Donatist lay people were fined, and their churches were fined. And then eventually in 415, they're forbidden from holding services on pain of death. And this gets back to Cyprian Novatian Schism. The holiness, the purity of the church is important. And so schism is not to be allowed. And so they fight strongly against them. The Novatian Schism, which Cyprian fights against, and now we have the Donatist Schism, which Augustine fights against. And so that happens in between Constantinople in 381 and Ephesus in 431. Moving forward to Ephesus. Ephesus is fighting against Nestorianism and Pelagianism. Nestorianism is dealing with something that eventually comes to be called Docetism. Docetism is based on the Greek word dikeo, and dikeo means to seem or to think. And Docetism is the belief that Jesus just appeared to be human. So Jesus wasn't truly human, he just appeared to be human. Nestorius holds to a version of this, which is that there are two persons. There's a true human person and there's a true divine person. But there's no union of the two persons, that they sort of overlap. So we have the divine Christ and we have the human Jesus, and they sort of overlap for a time. That's Nestorian's perspective on Christology. And so Ephesus, you can't allow this, because if Jesus is on the cross and the human Jesus dies, then how's that any different than any other human dying? The human Jesus resurrects and ascends. What's so important about that? It has to be the what's called the hypostatic union. The hypostatic union is hypostasis is a term for a person of the Trinity, and it's a union of essence within a hypostasis. So the hypostatic union is the divine essence and the human essence united within the person of Christ. If it's not a single person, then redemption does not work. It doesn't. It just doesn't work. So Nestorius is a heretic. Nestorianism does not work. Pelagianism is this idea that humans are basically good. Pelagius is from Britain, and he comes down to Rome and starts teaching that basically you're inherently good. You just you've got a little dirty, maybe. You just got to clean yourself up and work your hardest, and you can make it. And this is unfortunately very similar to what a lot of Christians believe today, to some degree. That God has grace for you, and if you just do your best, then He'll let you in. Pelagianism is a heresy because we can't do this on our own. We can't even do this on our own if God nudges us in the right direction. We need God's grace every step of the way. Another one of the central issues here at Ephesus is this notion of Theotokos. And this one might strike you as kind of odd, but stick with me here. Theotokos means bearer of God. And this is one of the words that gets used to combat Nestorianism. And what they're saying is, can you say that Mary gave birth to God? Because if there's a union within the person, if there's a hypostatic union within the person of Christ, then the baby that Mary gave birth to is God. And so we can properly say that she gave birth to God. Nestorius wants to say that she is Christotokos, that she gave birth to Christ. She did not give birth to God. And it's because he has a division within the person of Jesus, right? That there's not a true hypostatic union there. And as a result, on his view, salvation falls apart. And the way that they define this, the way that they distinguish, in the same way in Nicaea they use homoousios to eliminate Arianism. In Ephesus, they use Theotokos to eliminate Nestorianism. So that's what Theotokos means, and this is where you might start to feel uncomfortable, because maybe you see this as placing undue emphasis on Mary, but I mean, Scripture says that Mary is highly favored, right? And Protestants during Christmas sing "Mary, Did You Know?" And so we're comfortable with singing to Mary in a worship service, and yet somehow we have a problem with saying that she is Theotokos, that she is the bearer of God. This is problematic. I'm not saying that we should worship Mary, and by the way, a good Catholic wouldn't say that you worship Mary either. That's not the point here. The point is that there's some level of reverence given to her. And it's the same, you would revere perhaps your pastor or a significant figure in your life that's really helped you through whatever struggles you've had. This is, we revere maybe, Billy Graham or Mother Teresa. It's the same thing here. This is just a unique and it's just a unique person who's done something incredible. And so we have a certain amount of reverence for her, but we don't worship her. That's not the perspective here. And so the Council of Ephesus might make some Protestants uncomfortable, but if you understand it in context, there's not a lot being said here that really needs to unsettle us. Okay. The next council is the Council of Chalcedon in 451, and this is where we get our foundation for Christology. The Chalcedonian Confession is that Jesus is fully God and fully man, and that's the focus of Chalcedon, is to finally nail down this notion that Jesus is fully God and fully man. This is what puts an end, really, to the Christological controversy. There's still some debate about Christology moving forward, but I mean, this is really, putting the post in the ground and saying this is what we believe about Jesus. And that's important. And by the way, the Trinitarian controversies, 319 to 419, Christological controversies, probably 419 to 451. There's a couple of really great books that you can get that will explain these both to you if you're interested in either of these periods. These books are named the Christological Controversy and the Trinitarian Controversy. So they have brief explanations of the controversy by a solid scholar, and then they have primary readings from the period to help you understand perspectives. So, for instance, for Arianism, there's some selections from things that Arius actually wrote that you can read, so you can get a feel for who he was and what he believed. So it's really helpful. Moving forward, our second council of Constantinople is in 553 AD, and this is contrary to Nestorianism, because Nestorianism doesn't want to die. So this is one of those things that we have a consistent problem with, is trying to define our Christology carefully enough that define our Christology well enough that we don't have any conflicts like this. And then similar to Nestorianism, though still different, is Monophysitism. And Monophysitism is that there isn't a hypostatic union, similar to what Nestorius would say. There isn't a hypostatic union. There's one nature. Now Nestorius would not say that. Monophysitism is that Jesus was divine, and he wasn't really human. And Monophysitism comes from mono and physis. Physis is form or maybe essence or nature or something like that in Greek. And so it's just saying one form, one nature, one essence, that sort of thing. That's what we're getting at here with Monophysitism. And that is just obviously false. If Jesus is just divine, then he does not know what it's like to be. The author of Hebrews says that that he was tempted at all points yet without sin, but he can sympathize with our infirmities in all ways. That he knows what it's like to be us. And again, going back to Gregory of Nazianzus, what he is not assumed, he is not healed. Another way to put that is what he is not assumed, he is not redeemed. So Monophysitism is heresy. And then Third Council of Constantinople was in 680 to 681, and this is contra monotheletism. And monotheletism is, again, from monos, one, and theleo. Theleo is the word for will, I wish, I desire. So what this is saying is that Christ had one will. And that might not seem like so much of a heresy to you, but will is a function of essence. And so if Jesus is a hypostatic union of two essences, then he has to have a will pertaining to each of those essences. So he has to have a divine will, and he has to have a human will. Otherwise, if he only has one will, how do we make sense of him telling the Father in the garden, not my will, but yours be done? Jesus has to have two wills to make sense of that. He has to have a divine will and a human will, and he has to be saying to the Father in that moment, not my human will, but your divine will be done. Okay. Now, this is one, as we move forward, to monothelitism and the Second Council of Nicaea, which is the one coming up after this. These are the ones that are less widely held by Protestants. Pretty much everything up to this point is going to be held by Protestants. Second Council of Constantinople, Council of Chalcedon, all of that is mostly going to be held by Protestants. But monothelitism, I know Protestants that reject that. And then the next one coming up here, the Second Council of Nicaea, and the Protestants reject that as well. But broadly speaking, these are the seven councils that are accepted by Protestant Christianity, in addition to obviously accepted by Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. And mainly that's because after the Second Council of Nicaea, which we're about to talk about, the next council happens after the Great Schism. So after that point, the Catholics and the Orthodox do not agree on councils after the schism for obvious reasons. So finally, the Second Council of Nicaea is 787 AD. This is one of the reasons why in the patristic period in 800 AD it fits all of the seven councils under the patristic period, and then the medieval period can begin a couple hundred years before the Great Schism. Seems to make the most sense to me. The Second Council of Nicaea is dealing with iconoclasm. And there are two perspectives here. There's the iconoclasts and the iconodules. The iconoclasts are saying that we should destroy icons, and the iconodules are saying that we should worship icons. Worship's probably a strong term there. Again, it's reverence or that sort of thing. And this might be one of those things that kind of unnerves you. Again, we don't know what to do with artwork in worship, that kind of thing. But it doesn't need to. Think about it this way: if you're married, or if you have kids, or you have something or someone that you particularly love, if you have a picture of them, that picture does not replace them, but you may look at that picture a lot. And there's nothing particularly wrong with that. And one of the arguments here against icons and worship is that, the Ten Commandments forbid us from making any images. But one of the arguments for icons is that God himself has made an image for us in the person of Jesus. And John of Damascus, who's one of the fathers that argues in favor of iconodule, in favor of using icons in worship, it's a very interesting argument. He says, if you deny icons in worship, you deny the incarnation. Because if you say that we can't visibly represent Jesus, then you're saying that Jesus never came visibly. If you're saying that we can't visibly represent Jesus, then you're saying that Jesus didn't exist visibly. You're saying that he didn't show up physically. Because if he showed up physically, then he has a physical appearance, and that physical appearance can be represented. Now, maybe we don't get it correct, but the purpose isn't to get it, to get a fully accurate perspective of what Jesus looked like physically. The purpose is to have something to look at, a visible representation that can help you focus in the midst of the worship service. And now I'm not trying to argue that icons are a good thing, or we need to reinstitute icons in worship, but if you understand the philosophical background here, if you understand what's called Platonic philosophy, Platonic philosophy has this notion of forms. And so there's this world of the ideals, the world of the forms, and it's invisible and it's out of our reach. And, we can't access that. But the visible world has all of these reflections of the invisible world. So there's all of these things here that point to the invisible reality. So if you see something, you see a shirt that's red, you're not really seeing the color red. You're seeing something that is meant to call your mind to the invisible property of redness. I understand that that's philosophically confusing, perhaps, but you don't have to understand it perfectly. The reason that I'm sharing it is because that philosophical perspective is what informs iconography. Iconography is meant to give you a visible representation that's meant to call your mind up to this invisible thing in this invisible realm that you can't reach, so that you have something here that you can look at that represents something that you can't see. I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing. Now, obviously, we have to be careful of how we would use them or anything like that. No, I'll leave that to you and your ministry. I'm not saying that we necessarily need to institute icons. But I do think that we need to seriously think through a theology of the visual, because in our churches we tend to have a lack of, we just have a lack of aesthetics. We don't have, I remember a friend who, his wife and he and his wife went through Europe for a time, just took a few weeks vacation, and visited a lot of cathedrals and visited just some beautiful places. And I remember him telling me, it's quite something to worship in a place that has more aesthetic value than a remodeled Costco. Because a lot of our churches are just these big warehouse buildings that have just been remodeled, and there's just not this architectural call to beauty, to worship, to grandeur, and to awe. So I do think that we need to think through that. Obviously, we need to be careful of idolatry and all that sort of thing. But I think we are missing a theology of aesthetics. So, Heavenly Father, I thank you that, again, you've allowed us an opportunity to study about you, to study about your word and your people. And Father, as we close today, I want to thank you for the history of your people who have handed down to us the tradition. They've handed down to us context, what we believe and why. And I just thank you for that, Lord. Thank you that we have this rich history to study, to better understand you and how you've interacted with your people. Father, as we move forward with our day, with our week, with our month, with our year, I pray that you would help us to appreciate that you are the beautiful one, and that as a result, that we ought to find beauty in the world as a reflection of you. And our worship should incorporate beauty as a reflection of you. In whatever manner that you lead us, I pray that we would just be open to that. Not just for us, Lord, but for the sake of those who do not know you, that your beauty would draw them into a relationship with you through the power of your Son, through the power of your Spirit, for the sake of your name, for the sake of your glory, for the sake of your kingdom.